So the first thing I'm going to do is, before adding in the edge loop on the inside, is go in and try and get it as close as I can to hitting this this plate here. Now I'm going to drag out this point. Once again, I'm going to scale that in and just move it into position. And now you can see we've got a little bit of a problem where this geometry is flowing here incorrectly. What I want it to do is have a smooth surface here and a hard edge along here. So I can simply redistribute that by connecting down here and then connecting up, and bam, you end up with that nice clean geometry. And if I show you that from now you can see that little pinch that was there. It's still there, but it's nowhere near as bad as it was. It's definitely going to be, at this point, a lot easier to adjust that than it was with the weird, triangle, a weird square coming off, causing that pinch down the bottom here. So as you can see from here now, I can push and pull out until this area here is nice and smooth. Now, as usual, at all points, I'm just constantly going in and refining some of these curves. Because the more you bring out, the more you need to go, the more topology you bring out, the more you need to go in and just double check that all that stuff you've been adding isn't extended from an incorrect base. So you're constantly trying to balance out how much detail you put in, how much new detail you put in compared to how much cleaning you do on the topology you've already got. See, I'm just going in and trying to redistribute these a little bit. And as usual, see this pinch on the outside here. Once I go in and add some beveling, just like we've got on the edge here, it'll be much easier to determine how much further in that point needs to go. But when you do have an area like that, what I can do is I can select it, and then from the opposite side, I've shown you this in previous lessons, go in and as I'm pulling this, take note of what's happening down here, because that tells me what axis I need to push that vertex in on, and I can just hold X and pull that in until that pinching disappears. Okay, now I'm going to grab all these vertices down the bottom, and I'm just going to drag them down. And actually what I can do is I can drag them down once and then twice, and then select the edge ring in between and delete it. And this is going to cause a base mesh for us to work with when putting in the chin area. I'm going to leave this. I'll explain a little bit later when I go in and start adding some detail to this area, but it's probably one of the trickiest points of the surface that we're going to work with in this lesson, because you've got an area that's kind of rounded out this way. you know, and we can't see that yet because we don't have the edge loop in the center, but then you've got these two hard points. So it's going to require going in and adding a little bit of a weird topology, and I'll potentially, if I get time, show you how to do it a couple of different ways. So you notice as I drag that up, because the curvature once again starts flowing in this direction as well, backwards, I rotate all the geometry together, and what that does is it's going to keep the curvature we had lined up here flowing back vertically. So I can just go in and delete these two edges. And now what I can do is I'm actually going to remove this inside loop, select all these together, scale them down, and just move them into place. And now you can see that the way the design works in terms of how this curve flows into the, you know, the roundness on the edges, we don't need to do any real editing. We just need to make sure that the scale is right, and that's what's going to help create that nice, smooth, rounded faceplate. Just move these up into position. And don't worry about this pinching that's happening here, because once again, I can fix that in the exact same way as I fixed this faceplate, where you can see this kind of T-junction happens just by simply going in and chamfering this a little bit later. Then the topology will flow around. I mean, obviously we need to have a couple of edge loops rounding it off this way first, but that will fix that situation. Just going to go in and chamfer this top piece. And you can see what's happening here is we get a little bit of a wobble in the surface. So I can fix that just by, even though I'm moving the vertices on the left here, and as usual, I'm just repeating some of the same techniques I've explained throughout the course. I'm looking at the opposite side while doing this because it's critically important to make sure that that curve does flow up nice and evenly. So as I make those adjustments, I can start pulling some vertices down. Just going to grab all these together. Just realized that that point kind of doesn't actually stick out as far as I thought. So I'm just going in and just kind of re-rounding off the surface. So what's happening here is because we've got the symmetry setting on the inside, the threshold's a little bit too high. We're getting these two vertices pinching. So I'm just going to drop that down until that dissipates. And now I can go back to, shaping that. Just connected those two extra points, and now we've got a little bit more of a similar distribution of polygons that we have on the bottom faceplate. And throughout the whole model, I'm going to constantly try and keep the polygons, where possible at least. There's obviously going to be areas that require little bits of detail, but on the flat and smooth parts, I'll try and keep the polygons roughly this size. And on personal models, sometimes that's not always necessary, but when you're trying to do something a little bit more professional, like an Iron Man model, it helps with the UV distribution when you're unwrapping the mesh, and it also makes sure that kind of no matter where you're at, if you have to go in and add detail, you've kind of gotten used to the curves flowing over the mesh and how to edit this level of polygons. So if you start all of a sudden going twice as detailed as this, the workload for optimizing that area becomes a lot more, or in general, things just become a lot more difficult. And if you go lower resolution than this, you might not have enough detail to actually go in and add those finer details later on in the process. So whatever's working for this main faceplate, I'm just going to try and continue that up through the surface itself. You'll see once again, I'm just trying to keep things, you know, these edges that are coming out this way, all just happening evenly. You can see here it just goes down, then kind of pops up and down again. So little things like that are actually going to make all the difference in terms of how clean your mesh looks. I'll go from above. You can see little problems like that just start popping up. So I'm not really happy with this surface yet, but it's better than it was when I started out. But I'm just going to kind of adjust a couple more vertices, and then I'll get on to adding these stuff up here. At this point I can go in, now that I've got all the polygons kind of distributed this way in a square kind of fashion, I can go in and do the same thing I did to this point here. I'm just going to do something a little bit different this time. Rather than just welding a point to here and causing a little bit of a pinch, what you can do is you can go in and chamfer this point here and target weld like so. And that's going to leave us with the polygons necessary to create a nice pinch-free area. It's just going to require a little bit of editing to make that happen. So I'm going to pull this in like so. And you can see we've got that pinch there. I just need to go from side on, make a couple of adjustments, because the goal here is to get this happening perfectly flat, or as flat as possible anyway, you know. And as I pull this in, you'll notice that pinch start to disappear, even though we've got a 5-sided polygon in that area. I can actually further reduce the effect of that just by pulling it around like so. And you know, once again, just because that's a 5-sided polygon doesn't mean that it's, you know, bad topology. Because if I go in and turn off the isoline display and go back to one iteration, now you can see what's actually happening and how the mesh is smoothing. So from above, you can see what's happening is we're not getting the roundness, kind of, it all fails here. You know, here we've got some nice stuff happening. But then it all starts to go to shit a bit up here. So I can just pull this down. I'm just constantly looking for little bits that just look a bit out of whack. Let's see here, for example. So even though that's a little bit too wobbly for my own liking, you know, I'm just going to try and block out this whole faceplate in this lesson so that we've got something to work on. And right at the end, I'll go in and do my final tweaking to get all of this kind of flowing nicely. But for now, you can see how the topology is nice and even throughout the surface. You know, there's a couple of little things we can do, like going in and adding in an edge loop on here, on the inside. So I can go in. I'm going to not add it down the bottom here. And now I can go in and connect it to this point. I'm going to connect an edge loop along the side here and just target weld that. And now you can see that connects like so. Now to keep this flowing evenly, I can add in another edge loop down the bottom here. And there you go, perfect topology. Actually just going to leave that and pull these down because it's not fully necessary. And you can see that removes that pinching that we were getting there. So now we're going to create the edge loops to kind of flow up through here. So I'm going to, for this area, I'm going to once again use the scale tool, pull it down, you know, go straight to the side. What I can do is I can rotate that. You can see it's a little bit more flat, so I'm going to use the scale tool on that area. You know, I'm not completely sure this area is correct. You can see it's a little bit more tricky to get happening. I'm going to grab these points, pull them in. And then pull down. Now I know that these are going to have to line up exactly here. So now you can see that this area, if I pull this in, it needs to be completely flat. So the topology is going to need to flow around this way and around this way. So we've got some hard edge there and a hard edge here. So to do this, I'm going to grab these vertices, or these edges, sorry, chamfer it, just like so. I'm going to grab these ones, unselect here, and unselect here, and chamfer this way. Now, because I don't have a perfect solution for this area yet, I'm just going to do something that's kind of potentially going to work, but it might require some more fine tuning on this outside part. So you can see what I've done here is we've got this weird shape. I can connect up between those two, resulting in a triangle. But if I slide that point down and go in and connect along here, you'll notice that it gives me the option connecting these two points, removing this one, and then we end up with a nice clean topology where it's flowing both directions. It's symmetrical, and the mesh isn't as dirty as it was. So you can see now I'm just I'm just going to undo that and just kind of explain what I'm trying to do here. You'll notice this point kind of is going in a little bit too far. It's not flowing evenly along this curve that's running up here. So I'm just correcting that. And as I move this out, you'll notice now that that topology flows a little bit more evenly, but it's going to require going in and cleaning up this kind of roundness. So it can get a little bit tedious, you know what I mean? But if you just constantly go in, make those small adjustments, you will maintain the smoothness on your surface. So one of the things that's been bugging me now is taking a look at this pinch in the eye area here. So I'm going to go in and add a chamfer to this part. I'm just going to do it like so, and I'm going to keep that same setting so that it's always even. You'll notice that when I add edges at the start of the process, I don't go in and add too much hardness. I try and keep things a little bit versatile, because if I really need to go in and make this like kind of laser sharp, I can just simply go in and add a connection into that area, and you can see what that does is it just goes from being, perfectly rounded to perfectly sharp. But it's something I save right until the end of the process. So I'm going to go in and add a connect up here and then slide this up. It's another little trick I've got, and if you'll notice the little pinch that's happening here, I can get rid of that once again with some careful placement. I just need to make sure that from above the mesh is smoothing evenly, and it pulls in just a little bit, and then that goes away. Not completely though, I will go in at some point and just kind of refine those edges a little bit more, and you can see I can select this and pull these in just at that tiny little bit, so you can see we've gone from having zero difference there to just slightly inwards. And what that does is the way that the tessellation works, it's going to pull that geometry in. So with the ice line off, we weren't getting that slight curve. It was perfectly flat. But I just want to make sure that it's pulling in just that little bit. It's going to help us catch some highlights on that surface. Going to chamfer this up the top here. I'm going to pull this whole kind of point in. I can unselect the inner areas and then pull this in like so, and that's going to give me that bevel along the eye line. Quite an important area, so I want to make sure that I've got the thickness of this bevel correct. So I've actually got up a reference to the right here from a movie poster, and when we go in and do the lighting lesson, I'm going to try and create an action scene like this. We're only going to have the bus. What I mean is I'm going to try and create some lighting to simulate that kind of movie poster look. Pull this in just a little bit. So there's actually some smaller details where this eye socket kind of comes in underneath. I'm not going to get to that in this lesson because I just want to block out as much as possible on the head, but it will be a cool little area to show you how to go in and add some finer detail. Basically what happens on the mesh is, there's a little area where this eye socket kind of clicks into place, and it goes like this, and then this part slots into that area. You can still see there's a little bit of pinching there. I'm just going to save that because I'm not sure exactly, if I've got the bevel